The dirty cast-iron skillet hit the table in front of me hard enough to rattle the silverware. Nearly 20 people went quiet, and the smell of braised ribs hung over the dining room I had spent 2 days feeding. Janice kept one hand on the skillet like she was presenting something precious. Even though grease clung to the rim and the handle had gone gray from heat, it belonged to family, she said, smiling at me, and I knew you'd appreciate something practical. 10 minutes earlier, Brenna had opened a leather travel bag, and Paul had received a tool set. Then Janice had fastened a gold bracelet around Corinne's wrist and told her, "I hope you have plenty of special occasions to wear this." Corinne had been introduced as Derek's co-worker, someone who had helped him through a difficult season. But Derek never looked at me while his mother adjusted the clasp. When Janice pushed the skillet closer, she added, "You're so good at cleaning up what other people don't want to deal with." A few guests laughed because they were waiting for me to laugh first. Brenna's smile disappeared when she looked across the table and saw her brother staring at his plate. Paul's eyes moved from the bracelet on Corinne's wrist to the blackened pan in front of me, and his jaw tightened without a word. Derek kept both hands beneath the table, where they could not be asked to defend me. I rested my palms beside the skillet and let everyone see the comparison Janice had arranged. "Thank you," I told her, keeping my voice level. "I brought something for you too." I reached beneath my chair and placed a white-wrapped box beside the pan, its ribbon tied across the top. Janice's smile widened as she pulled it toward herself, certain I was trying to earn a place at her table. She slipped one finger under the ribbon, while Derek lifted his head at last. I met Derek while repairing a failed refrigeration unit at the club where he worked, and he never questioned why the technician was a woman. He listened while I traced the problem through a burned relay, asked questions, and carried my tools back to the truck. Back then, his attention felt like respect instead of surprise. I trusted that difference enough to marry him. After the wedding, the same competence became something his family treated like an open invitation. Janice called when her ice maker quit, when Brenna needed furniture moved, or when Derek ignored another warning light. I kept showing up because every favor felt like another chance to stop being the outsider at their table. Janice would smile and call me so useful, as though usefulness were the closest thing to affection she offered. At family dinners, she reduced my work to a joke everyone could understand. "Jocelyn fixes dishwashers," she would announce, leaving out my certifications, the commercial systems I handled, and the technicians I trained. Once, she added that my irregular hours probably suited me because no children were waiting at home. Derek saw me stiffen, then murmured later, "She's old-fashioned. Don't make it bigger than it is." He always asked me to understand his mother, but never asked his mother to respect me. The changes in Derek arrived through objects before explanations: a gym bag packed with clean clothes, 2 boxed wine glasses that never reached our kitchen, and a changed phone code. Then I found a delivery receipt for curtains sent to an apartment in Wauwatosa. Derek called it a new company site, but my work had taken me through every facility his employer operated, and none stood there. I saved the address instead of confronting him. 2 evenings later, Derek texted that a mechanical failure had trapped him at work, so I drove past the apartment building. Paul's SUV sat beneath a security light, parked far from the entrance, as if distance could make it less recognizable. The engine was cold, the windows dark, and Derek was nowhere near the job he had described. I did not knock on the apartment door or wait for Derek to come outside. I drove home because I needed something stronger than suspicion before he could call it another misunderstanding. In the drawer where we kept insurance papers and warranties, I found a lease tucked behind his car title. Derek Barrett and Corinne Maddox were listed as occupants, and beside Corinne's name, under emergency contact, he had written fiancé. The lease had begun months before Derek claimed our marriage was in trouble. That date proved the apartment was not a temporary escape after a separation. It had been prepared while he still came home, ate my dinners, and talked about saving for a future together. A spare key sat inside the pocket of the coat he left in our shared closet, but I never used it. I photographed the lease, returned every page, and took the key to a family law attorney in Milwaukee. She explained that Wisconsin generally treats income earned during marriage as marital property, so I should preserve evidence and avoid entering the apartment. I opened a separate account for future paychecks, continued covering my share of household expenses, and filed for divorce through the proper process. Derek did not know because the papers had not been served. 3 nights before Janice's dinner, I heard Derek talking in the garage while I carried groceries through the kitchen. "Just get through Sunday," he told Corinne. "My mom will make the rest easier." He reminded her to wear the dress Janice liked, and I understood why Janice had insisted I cook for everyone. She was not welcoming a coworker to dinner. She was helping her son rehearse my replacement while I prepared the meal. I placed the spare key, the lease signature page, and confirmation that my divorce petition had been filed inside a white gift box. Then I tied the ribbon tightly and drove to Brookfield, knowing Janice expected food, labor, and silence. She would receive the first 2, but the silence she had counted on no longer belonged to her by the time dinner began. Janice slipped one finger beneath the ribbon and opened the box, still wearing the smile of someone expecting gratitude. The first thing she saw was the apartment key tied to a card with the Wauwatosa address printed across it. Beneath that sat the lease page carrying Derek's name beside Corinne Maddox, followed by the court confirmation showing my divorce petition had been filed. Her smile held for 1 second, then disappeared as she looked from the key to her son. I kept my hands beside the skillet and let the papers explain themselves before I spoke. "You gave Corinne a bracelet to welcome her into this family, so I thought you should keep the key to the home you helped Derek hide." Janice pushed the box away and snapped. "That apartment was temporary because you refused to accept your marriage was over." The room changed with that sentence, because she had just admitted she knew about the apartment before I placed it on her table. "No divorce had been filed before this week," I answered, touching the court confirmation without lifting it. "That is the first petition," and I filed it. Corinne turned toward Derek, the bracelet bright against her wrist, and asked, "You told me she filed months ago. Why does this say she filed now?" Derek looked at the paper, then at his mother, searching their faces for somewhere to put the answer. "It's complicated, and this isn't the place," he muttered. But Corinne did not let him hide inside the sentence. "Did Jocelyn file before tonight? Yes or no?" He opened his mouth, closed it, and stared down at the table while everyone waited. His silence gave Corinne the answer he had promised would never reach her. She removed her key from the ring and placed it beside the one inside Janice's box. Then she unclasped the bracelet, returned it to the velvet case, and pushed both gifts toward Janice. "I will not walk into that apartment again," she told Derek before standing and leaving the dining room. In less than a minute, he lost the wife he planned to push aside, and the woman he believed would be waiting in the home he prepared. Corinne's footsteps faded, and Derek turned toward me as if I had become the problem they needed to solve. He accused me of turning a private matter into humiliation, but I kept my eyes on the bracelet, keys, and skillet Janice had placed before me. "Your mother invited her, welcomed her, and handed me that pan in front of everyone," I said. "I did not create this scene." I stopped pretending not to see it. Derek pushed back from the table and insisted he had been trying to end our marriage without hurting me. I looked at the bracelet beside Janice's gift box and asked who his plan had protected besides himself. Paul cut through the silence by asking whether Derek had used his SUV to visit the apartment. Derek admitted borrowing it because his car needed work, and Paul held out his hand. "Give me the keys." Derek stared at him, then asked how he was supposed to get home. Paul answered quietly, "You have been paying for another place for months. Use it." The words landed harder than shouting because Derek had no answer for an address carrying his name. He placed the SUV key in his father's palm and sat down without looking at anyone. Brenna lifted the leather travel bag Janice had given her and set it beside her mother's chair. She would not keep a gift handed out during a performance designed to rank the women at the table. Janice snapped that I had turned her daughter against the family, but Brenna looked at the seating, bracelet, and skillet. You arranged every part of this. Do not blame Jocelyn because we finally noticed. I carried my baking dishes and containers from the kitchen while the room remained divided around the table. I left the meal because it had been served, but I took the skillet Janice had given me. Derek followed me toward the door, still trying to force one private conversation from the wreckage. Paul stepped between him and the driveway, while Janice stood beside the abandoned gifts, unable to order anyone to rescue the son whose plan had collapsed inside her house. I returned to the house Derek and I shared, carried my dishes inside, and slept behind the locked guest room door. The next morning, a process server handed Derek the divorce papers while I was at work. My attorney directed every discussion about the apartment, household expenses, and shared property into proper channels. That left Derek with no room to turn each call into another explanation about what he had meant. Corinne sent me one message that afternoon and kept it brief. Derek had shown her an unsigned divorce draft and claimed I was refusing to complete it. So she had believed our marriage existed only on paper. I'll provide the messages and receipts if your attorney needs them, she wrote. I forwarded everything without replying, because her records mattered more than either of us trying to make the other feel better. The landlord did not release Corinne simply because the relationship ended. She negotiated an early departure, lost part of her deposit, and paid the fee under the lease. Derek had to keep the apartment alone or cover the remaining cost of ending it. When he asked Paul for help, his father answered, "You chose the place, so you can pay for leaving it." Derek's employer never disciplined him for having an affair, but his work records created a different problem. The emergency shifts he claimed had justified his absences did not match maintenance reports, and several inspections had been pushed onto coworkers. Management moved him to a fixed schedule and removed the flexibility he had used to maintain 2 lives. Nothing was announced publicly, but the empty apartment and rigid shifts made the consequences visible every morning. Janice called me days later, not to apologize, but to demand the skillet back because it had belonged to her aunt. I reminded her that she had handed it to me as a gift in front of everyone at her table. She insisted she did not want it turned into something that embarrassed the family at all. The skillet did not embarrass anyone. I answered, "What you placed beside it did." The divorce took months, and nothing about it felt like the clean ending Derek had promised Corinne. He had to disclose the rent, furniture, service fees, and every payment made on the apartment while we were still married. My attorney did not ask for the apartment or every dollar connected to it, because neither one belonged in my future. She made sure the marital income Derek had redirected was counted, so I would not carry any part of the life he built without me. I kept the truck titled in my name, my separate paycheck account, and the right to leave our rental without inheriting his remaining obligations. Derek asked me to tell his family that Corinne had misunderstood him and Janice had only tried to help during a difficult marriage. I refused to repair the story for him, but I also never posted documents, contacted his employer, or invited strangers into it. The truth already had enough witnesses sitting around one table. When the apartment became too expensive, Derek tried to move back into his parents' house. Janice wanted to let him stay, but Paul drew the line at dinner and told him, "You can eat here, but you cannot move back so your mother can clean this up." Derek turned on Janice next, blaming her gifts and seating plan for making everything worse. She finally heard what everyone else had heard for years, when protection stopped working. Her son treated the protector as the problem. Brenna kept her distance from Janice and later apologized for noticing Derek's shifting stories without asking harder questions. I thanked her. But I did not step back into the family role I had spent years trying to earn. Corinne moved into a smaller apartment, kept her job, and ended every form of contact with Derek. He remained in the nearly empty place he had called his future, paying alone for rooms neither woman wanted anymore. While the second key stayed abandoned in Janice's box beside the bracelet she had chosen so carefully herself. After the divorce was final, I rented a small house outside Milwaukee with enough yard for a table and a few pots of herbs. I did not open a company or wake up wealthy, but customers kept asking for me, and my employer moved me into training new technicians with a raise that matched the work. Paul sent a short letter admitting he had watched Janice diminish me because silence kept his own home comfortable. I read it once, accepted the apology, and left the relationship where it belonged. Janice wrote later and admitted the skillet had been chosen to remind me that she saw me as useful, not equal. I kept the letter, kept the skillet, and did not return to her table. Brenna and I met for coffee sometimes because she never carried Derek's messages or asked me to forgive him. Derek remained in maintenance work on a fixed schedule, and his final apology asked for nothing, so I let it stay unanswered. I cleaned the skillet, seasoned it, and used it in my new kitchen. One evening, a man I met through a hiking group finished dinner, washed the dishes without being asked, and paused before opening a cabinet. "Where do these go?" he asked, and that simple question told me more than promises ever had. I pointed to the shelf and realized I was no longer earning my place by fixing what everyone else broke. Nothing in that room needed me to disappear to stay peaceful. Thank you for staying with me through a story that once felt like my whole life. I learned that peace begins with one honest boundary, and people who never confuse love with service. My home is quiet now. My heart is open, and the life ahead finally feels entirely mine.